Well, happy Tuesday, everybody. Pastor Steve here. Thank you so much for joining me for today's devotion, whether you're listening to the podcast or watching the video. We are in the 6th chapter of Judges. We skipped chapter 5, sort of. I mentioned it yesterday because it's a sequel to chapter 4, the story of Deborah, because it's the song that Deborah and Barak wrote and sang and taught the Jewish people, celebrating their victory. So we jumped ahead to chapter 6 today. And in this chapter, Deborah is now off the scene, if you will, and the people of Israel, this time in the central part of the country, sin again, turn to idols and other gods, and end up as a result being oppressed by the Midianites. We see that in the first 4 verses. Then the sons of Israel did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord gave them into the hands of Midian 7 years. So they were subjected to severe treatment by the Midianites for those 7 years. Verse 2, the power of Midian prevailed against Israel. Because of Midian, the sons of Israel made for themselves the dens which were in the mountains and the caves and the strongholds. So many of them went into hiding in the mountains. For it was when Israel had sown, during the planting time, agricultural society, that the Midianites would come up with the Amalekites and the sons of the east, those who are east of the Jordan River over toward Syria. Today we would think about it. Jordan predominantly. And go against them. In verse 4, so they would camp against them and destroy the produce of the earth as far as Gaza, and leave no sustenance in Israel, as well as no sheep, ox, or donkey. So they would destroy their crops, kill much of their livestock. That would just make life hard. And then, after those 7 years of hardship, God hears the cry of the people, and He raises up a deliverer, another judge, and this time it's going to be Gideon, who many of you are familiar with. Drop down to verse 11 in chapter 6. Then the angel of the Lord came and sat under the oak tree, and tells where it's located, and he's speaking to Gideon. Gideon was beating out wheat in the wine press in order to save it from the Midianites. So he was harvesting his wheat and trying to beat it up and make it, grain they could use, and then take it and hide it. Verse 12, the angel of the Lord appeared to him and said to him, the Lord is with you, O valiant warrior. Now, notice Gideon's response, because this angel of the Lord comes and says, God is with you, you're a valiant warrior. I mean, he never fought, but God sees potential in Gideon, as He does in each of us. And He's going to use Gideon to deliver the people from the oppression of the Midianites. But notice Gideon's response initially in verse 13. Then Gideon said to him, to the angel of the Lord, O my Lord, if the Lord is with us, why? Why then has all this happened to us? What's he talking about? Well, the oppression for 7 years of the Midianites. And where are all His miracles which our fathers told us about? We heard about all these miracles when He delivered us from Egypt, when we conquered the land. It's not doing any of that now. He's saying, did not the Lord bring us up from Egypt? But now the Lord has abandoned us and given us into the hand of Midian. Wow. Gideon is blaming God for their predicament. I mean, they're in trouble. They're being oppressed by the Midianites because of their sin, turning their back on God, worshiping pagan idols, doing evil in the sight of God. And God had told them from the very beginning, going all the way back to the days of Moses, that if you turn your back on me and don't remain faithful and keep the covenant and obey me, and if you worship other gods and idols, this is what's going to happen to you. God told them, they still sinned and disobeyed God. It happened to them. And now even Gideon, who is going to become a hero, but right now, Gideon is somewhat like everybody else. God, why'd you abandon us? Blaming God. And it's so bad the angel keeps talking to him and convinces Gideon, and Gideon gets his heart right. And Gideon is instructed to go out and tear down one of these false idols that his father had built in this community where they all lived. Gideon is so afraid of the people's reaction, he does it at night when no one will see him. That's verse 27. The next morning they get up and see that their altar to Baal, these pagan gods, has been destroyed, and they're all mad. And they start asking around, and they figure out it was Gideon who did it. And they come to Gideon's dad and they say, send him out. We're going to kill him. That's how bad it was. That's how bad their sin was. They're turning to these pagan religions. Do you and I ever blame God for the consequences of our own choices, our own actions? As a pastor, I've seen that so many times over the years. People are making stupid decisions, sinful decisions, doing things they shouldn't do, not doing what they should do, and all of a sudden there's a problem, and it's a consequence of their choices, their behavior, their inactivity. They did it. Why did God let this happen to me, to us? We as human beings have a tremendous capacity for blaming God when we're the ones who messed up. Blaming God when He disciplines us and judges us because of our sin, our failure, our rebellion, our unfaithfulness. Even Gideon, who will become a hero, a judge, needed God's intervention in his life to wake him up to his own sin. Let me say something. When God confronts us, that is an act of love. The grace of God is sometimes demonstrated in His disciplining us, getting our attention. Just like a parent sometimes in love has to discipline their child, God, because He is a God of grace and mercy and loves us, sometimes has to say, wait a minute, you have sinned enough. It's time for the belt. It's time for the switch. Well, I can't say that anymore today. It's time for time out. Let me have your iPhone and your pad. You can't play with them for a day. Sometimes God says, you did this to yourself and you want to blame me? You ever done that? Easy to do, isn't it? But the grace of God will always work in our lives to help us come to a place of truth, of healing. And God sees in us, in the midst of our blindness and stubbornness, God sees in us potential for what can be. That's what He did with Gideon. Gideon started out blaming God, ended up being a hero. God sees potential in me and you, even when we're blind to our own sin. Aren't you thankful He does? Listen to Him and don't rebel against Him. Don't turn from Him. Listen to Him. I'll see you tomorrow.